Thank you, Soumya. Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the third session of the third Young Researchers Conference, titled Displaced Voices, Ritual Performances, and Memorialization in Exile. Today, we have Grace Mariam Raju with us to chair this session. Grace is a PhD scholar at the Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia. I would like to hand over the digital mic to Grace. Is Grace here?
Yeah, thank you,
Grace, hi. Sorry. Hi.
Good evening. Hi. Good evening, and once again, I think we are all eagerly looking forward to start the session. So I hope all our paper presenters are here. And so with that, I welcome the first presenter, Pratishta Pandey. Her paper is titled as Storytelling as Protest, Counter-Narratives from Kenya in Yvonne Adhiambo Ovo's Dust. Pratishta Pandey is a PhD scholar at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. Her work centers on the intersections of gender, spatial theory, feminist narratives, memory, myths in contemporary feminist literature. So, Pratishta,
Hi.
hi, welcome. So, over to you, Pratishta. You have 20 minutes for presentation, and the moderator will assist you with that. And post your presentation, we'll do a quick round of questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone present. I am Pratishta, a PhD scholar at IIM. Since I'm in the initial stages of PhD, this paper is a work in progress. So I look forward to any suggestions and feedback on this presentation. The title of my paper is Storytelling as Protest, Counter-Narratives from Kenya in Yvonne Adhiambo Ovo's novel Dust. So I will just share my screen. I think I'll need some permission for this.
Yeah, Soumya, can you please assist her, make her the
Yes.
admin? Yeah.
You should be able to share your screen now, Pratishta.
Is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Dust is a novel published in 2014, a few years after the post-election violence in Kenya in 2007. It is a story of a family living in the Turkana territory in northern Kenya. This region is an arid land, a desert, which is in contrast to the agriculturally fertile, socially developed, and politically active part of central Kenya. Claimed to be a no man's land, this region is geographically distant from the eruption of violence in Nairobi, and yet the novel begins with a death that has coincided with the post-election violence. Since this is a novel of multiple plot lines, I've attempted to make a rough chart mapping some events that I'll just, that took place throughout the novel. It is the death of Odi Oganda, a young adult, the son of Nipi and Nakai, and the elder brother of Ajani Uganda. In the prologue of the novel, it is revealed that ODD is gunned down in Nairobi during a police raid. The death of ODD not only triggers subsequent events within the novel, but also complex memories of colonial trauma, which must be read through the characters' attempts to render the present unmoved from the country's colonial histories. When Napier and Ajani bring ODD's coffin in front of Akai, she breaks down and shortly after gets in a car and physically escapes the scene. Dust has multiple instances where familiar expectations tied to funeral and mourning performances are narratively challenged. Since the beginning, Wood Ogik, the name of the house in which the Ogandas live, is seen as a point of contention. It is a place with mysterious past, unknown to the siblings, and at the same time, a site of trauma for the parents. The library is filled with books referring to a man named Hugh Bolton, whose whereabouts are unknown and whose mention evokes an evasive response from the parents. Coinciding with the death of ODD and the departure of Akai, a young man by the name of Asaya Bolton emerges at Wood Ogik, causing displeasure to Napier and curiosity for Ajani, both of whom are struggling to find ways to grieve the loss of ODD. In fact, it was ODD who had contacted Asaya leading him to their home to solve the mystery of Isaiah's alleged father, Hugh Bolton. Such a circumstance triggers buried memories of the past for Nepean, whose youth had looked similar to that of the young idealist ODD. Soon, a lot of mysteries are solved for Ajani, who goes on a quest to Nairobi to find ODD. Through my presentation, I aim to ask the following questions. How does forgiveness takes place when the wrongdoings are continuous and ever present? How does the post-colonial storytelling experience represent traumatic explorations? What kind of interventions does the novel form provide in the absence of narratives of neo-colonial violence from official records? By incorporating the role of memory in the culmination of mass silence, I also seek to include the larger frameworks of forgiveness and forgetting, which Dust contests as well. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, in his book Decolonizing the Mind, The Politics of Language in African Literature, discusses the rise of the novel form in Africa as a phenomena which was seen as a consequence of European imperialism. Over time, the novel form began to be appropriated by African writers who were exposed to Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress and the King James Version of the Bible. He notices with imperial powers. In the second phase of literary development, Thiong'o talks about the secularization of literary ambition, with writers taking inspiration from Samuel Richardson to Joseph Conrad. This phase was and still continues to be heavily dependent on the celebration of English-based literary activities. While debates on English as the medium of expression has remained a subject of dispute in post-colonial theory, more writers of Anglophone fiction in the contemporary times have acknowledged what Thiong'o calls the historical reality of a new colony. Owar's Dust is also included in the category that aims to represent the contentious legacy of colonialism in neo-colonial landscape. Hence, the novel becomes a story of many starts. Even though it begins with the death of ODD, the novel traces violence in the past, with every generation having its own contribution to the way modern Kenya looks. Commenting on European domination, Dipesh Chakrabarti in the article Post-Coloniality and the Artifice of History, who speaks for Indian past, writes that the dominance of Europe as the subject of all histories is a part of a much more profound theoretical condition under which historical knowledge is produced in the third world. Even though his article contests the homogeneous framework influenced by the European gaze that renders Indian representations to have been inadequate without the European subject, the same contestation can be made when talking about the label of African history and its cultural representation. Through Dust, Over asks a pertinent question. What has happened to Kenya after the departure of the British colonialists? Did they truly leave, or did their colonial legacies get passed to powers of the current nation state? Dealing with the neo-colonial realities of Kenya in a language that has been introduced through colonialism, Over challenges the frenzied obsession associated with the concept of origin, a notion picked apart in her representation of the Uganda's tumultuous history. Hence, the identities of such characters are made to be viewed from the lenses that are complex and not so simplistic. So who is Nepean Oganda? Should we look at him as a father, a husband, a family man, an ex-military, or a betrayer of a divisive government and a murderer? Who is ODD? Is he a brilliant engineer and a man of integrity, known to refuse bribery, or is he a gang leader? What about Ajani, the ambitious and creative artist, or a violent attacker? What about Akai? Is she an enigmatic presence who commands the room like no other? Or is she a neglectful wife and mother who runs away constantly? The post-colonial realities for Kenyans are filled with various ambiguities. For the subjects inhabiting such space, traumatic events are not singular and homogenized. They are a part of everyday realities, which require further unpacking. Over uses the novel form to establish the intention of healing by contesting the culmination of silences buried deep in the nation's past. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, known as TRC, was proposed by Archbishop Desmond Tutu in apartheid-ridden South Africa which was arguably conceived as a way forward for a highly polarized country where perpetrators of racial crimes were encouraged to face their surviving victims and confess. Kenya also had set up a similar commission known as TJRC, which drew a lot of criticism. So, Gabrielle Lynch, in her book, Performances of Injustice, The Politics of Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation in Kenya, highlights the gendered reasoning of the commission that characterized women as vulnerable, subordinate, emotional, and peaceful, and men as powerful, domineering, uncommunicative, and violent. In Dust, the onus of normative performance of mourning is actively headed by Napier, who puts his time building a cane for his son. On the other hand, Ajani finds an alternative way to perform grief. Briefly after the death of ODD, she leaves Ruth Ogik to find ODD and listen to his stories. She embarks on a mission to uncover the kind of life ODD lived while she was away in Brazil. This turn towards the past makes Ajani break away from the outlook of her predecessors, who resisted an exploration towards the memories of the past. Napier cries, "Why? Kenya's treacherous, she doesn't know it." It is soon revealed that despite the prestige of being a military man, Napier was exiled to the northern frontier district where Wood Ogik is built because he refused to partake in the country's murderous practices in response to the Mau Mau protests. Trying to shield their children from the realities of the post-colonial nation, the parents end up losing their child, who is thrown away from the university for refusing bribery. He soon joins a life of crime and loses his life. Akai, unlike Napier, struggles with the trauma of losing her unborn children, the father of whom was Hugh Bolton, who was an unsympathetic colonialist. During an attack on Akai, Napier, an associate of Bolton, intervenes, which results in Hugh Bolton's death. Despite being saved by Napier, their marriage does not prove to be happy, as Akai views Wood Ogik as a site of trauma from which he needs constant escaping. Unknown about the traumatic pasts of her parents, Ajani's journey to find stories to end up unraveling various trauma narratives that were previously concealed from her. The arrival of Isaiah Bolton into the narrative becomes a way through which the process of healing gets further solidified as he eventually ends up building the cane for ODD. Such instances in the novel create grounds for reconciliation, where Over shows that loss can only be addressed through the power of community and communal healing. It is revealed later that Isaiah Bolton was actually not the son of Hugh Bolton, yet he suffered due to inheriting the surname Bolton. Wood Ogik was built by Hugh, who wanted his wife Celine, who's Isaiah's mother, to live with him. After discovering the affair of Hugh and Akai, she becomes isolated and strikes a relationship with their Kenyan house help. Soon she leaves to England and gives birth to Isaiah. When he looks for Hugh, he's contacted by ODD, who was similarly looking for answers himself. Sorry. Yeah, so Annie Gagiano, in an interview titled De-Othering the Perpetrator, problematizes the generalization of collective identities. She talks about being wary of traumatized collectivity by saying that even though such markers can be recognized in some situations, it is not an invariable factor of assumption. This brings us to two ends of a spectrum, where on the one hand, Gagiano's assumptions about the suffering of Black people is an indicator of colonial attitudes still prevalent in the contemporary discourses that seek to territorialize Black suffering. And on the other hand, where the term trauma is callously used by the publishing industry to capitalize on the pain suffered by Africans throughout multiple turbulent periods of history. This simultaneous negation and over-fetishizing of Black suffering is critiqued in Owar's novel by refusing to fall into the notions of blanket generalizations regarding forgiveness and forgetting between perpetrators and victims as prescribed by such truth commissions. Echoing Professors Abdul Razak Gurna's use of writing of memory as a path to healing, Over similarly contributes to ethical discourses that are unique to the normal form. So with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Thank you, Pratishtha, for that wonderful presentation. I believe you have made a very engaging presentation with this novel, especially when Yvonne Adhiambo Awar is a contemporary writer from Kenya. She's dealing with the contemporary politics of Kenya. But your paper deals with a very interesting aspect of memory, forgiveness, and resilience. It's often said that memory plays a significant role in the process of reconciliation. Forgiveness also plays a very important role in the process of reconciliation. Forgiveness and memory, they're both connected in achieving this reconciliation. But when there is an element of resistance to it, it further complicates the matter. So, how do you see resistance in this triangular relationship, especially when forgiveness does not mean forgetting? The memory is still alive, but the community or the individual certainly goes through a cultural as well as an emotional transformation. But then how is the resilience how does the resilience survive through this transformation? If you could it's a quick question, comment, you could respond to that. And with that, I open the floor to the question. The questions in the chat box, Sudipta will guide you through it. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the novel, we can see that there are different generations are being represented. So when we are talking about the parents, we are seeing that there is a very active resistance when it comes to talking about their memories, because there is, as we can see, I showed a rough chart, but there were so many other points that happened throughout the novel. So they certainly had a very tough life, and there was not a singular traumatic event. So the traumatic event started from since they were children, and they kept going till their adulthood, and even after they had children. So we can see that when multiple traumatic events took place in their lives, the ability to be able to cope became it got lost.
Mm.
So their solution was to conceal the post-colonial realities to their children. So the region in which they live, it's completely devoid of contact with the mainstream Kenya. And the children absolutely had no idea about the kinds of lives their parents were living. But of course, traumatic explorations, they often seep through. So it's not like they didn't suffer, and eventually one of them ended up losing his life. So we can see that it is the role of the character of Ajani, who's the daughter. She is the one who's an empathetic listener. So she tries to find an alternative way to sort of evoke narratives that completely went missing. So she's the one who gives an ear to both her parents, and she empathizes with them. So that is an outlook which was previously missing from. So that was this thing.
Yeah.
Useful, I would say.
Since it's a working paper, I'm sure you will get more questions and comments, and you could reflect on them as well. Over to you, Sudipta. You can ask the questions in the chat
So
box.
we have not received any questions in the chat box, yes. Okay, we do have one. Thank you for that wonderful talk, Pratishtha. Would you feel that the concept of transgenerational trauma would be useful?
Yeah, certainly. I think what Over is trying to portray in her novel is that uh, it's not that a traumatic event happens and then you can forget and forgive and then move on. So for Kenyans, they thought that the villains were the Britishers, the British colonialists, and they were filled with enthusiasm when the Kenyan independence happened in 1963, I think. But soon those kinds of ambitions, it quickly overturned, and we saw that over the years, there were different points of violent eruptions. So be it Mau Mau uprising, or different through police brutality, and over time we saw that different regimes got changed, um, and the situation of Kenya did not improve. So those colonial legacies, I believe, it got passed down to the present modern to the past of the present modern state. And in 2007, which was just a few years before she wrote this novel, there was a big post-election violence, and multiple people ended up losing their lives. So she believes that until we are able to sort of talk about, sort of, purge whatever sins that we have committed. So she is taking accountability as Kenyans. She says that we also need to hold them, ourselves accountable for our own contribution the to the way modern day Kenya looks. So we are seeing that all the characters, they all are people with multiple layers and of personality. So they have all contributed to the kind of violence and frenzied obsession, um, where it's senseless violence. So they all have done that, but they're all individuals who are extremely traumatized as well. So that is what she's trying to reflect. So thank you for that comment, question.
Okay, we have another question for you. What role does diasporic displacement play in the novel?
Okay, so a few years before the events of this novel, um, uh, Ajani is the sister, and the daughter. She ends up, she does not find the place in which they live to be comfortable. So when she is applying for colleges, she ends up applying to Brazil. And that is a very different approach than her brother, who is very much rooted in their in their landscape. So, but even there, she has she has a very bad relationship with her partner, abusive relationship with her partner. And then what happens is that he ends up cheating on her with somebody, and then she just stabs him, and that stabbing coincided with her brother's death. So she's immediately, called back home by her father. And we're seeing that, such I mean, to use the word callously, traumatic, and because, ever since they were children, they also had instances where the parents sort of beat them up. So those kinds of traumatic things, it does translate even if you are going out. So, and similarly, we are seeing that the migration is happening in, various directions. So Isaiah Bolton, who's a Britisher, and he's mixed race person, I think, he ends up coming back to Kenya to sort of, read, I mean, to wanting to discover about his pain, about his, the secret of his father, who's eventually we find out he's not the father. But we are seeing that, and there are several other characters, there Indian shopkeeper, and many characters. So we are seeing that Kenya is a place with a lot of flavor, a lot of ethnicities, and uh, and there is a very prominent community that migrated from Goa. So they have also, lived in Kenya. So we are seeing that there are multiple ethnicities that are being, represented in the making of the modern day Kenya. So the question about the obsession with origin, and the way a lot of there are a lot of stereotypes about African literature that even Gugiwa Thoingo talks about, is that people think that there is a fight between a tribe A or tribe B or tribe C or tribe D, but that doesn't really happen, because there are a lot of mixing, I would say, of different. There are a lot of points of eruptions of violence and conflict. So that is really represented by her. So she doesn't care, in her representation, she doesn't care about who started what. She says that everybody is responsible through their own responses to such conflicts.
Thank you so much. I think we can move to the next speaker, Grace.
Yes. Our next speaker is Lakshmi P. Her paper is titled as "This is My Story: Role of Tibet Museum in Preserving Memory in Exile." Lakshmi P. is a PhD scholar at Christ University, Delhi, NCR. Uh, with a keen interest in interdisciplinary research, her interest lies at the intersection of memory studies, refugee studies, and women's studies. Her area of research is Tibetan writing in English in exile, with a focus on women's writing. So over to you, Lakshmi. Yes.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. So my name is Lakshmi and I am in my initial stage of research. I'm enrolled at Christ University, Bangalore, but currently based in Delhi. My interest in Tibet also lies in the fact that I've been working for a Delhi-based NGO which works for Tibetan refugees. So this paper stems from my interest in understanding the idea of Tibetan life in exile and their representation. So I'll share my screen. Is it visible?
Yes. Yes, your screen is visible.
Thank you. So the title of my paper, which is part of a larger project that you're working on, is "This is My Story: Role of Tibet Museum in Preserving Memory in Exile." So a brief overview about what I'll be talking about. We'll look at the idea of museums and nation, and then the statement of the problem, the introduction, the analysis, and the conclusion. So a quick overview of the discussion that has happened so far on the idea of museums and nation. So museums have been used as spaces to create a narrative of nationhood and a cultural heritage that is owned and accessible by all members of a nation. For example, Tony Bennett, in his work "The Birth of the Museum," he has spoken about how museums have been a very valuable, authentic, and significant space in shaping collective memory. And he has spoken about the role of museums in constructing narratives, its role in public education and cultural improvement. And Kavita Singh and Saloni Mathur, who have spoken about the creation of the National Museum in Delhi, the ways in which the National Museum placed in Delhi is entangled with what they refer to as the ambitions of a new nation, the dilemmas of a new nation, and how it brought the past in line with the current present that we are in right now, and how they were sites for retrieval, how the National Museum and museums in general in South Asia were sites for the retrieval of a past that all of us shared. And how, when the museums opened the doors for the public, what happened was a symbolic affirmation of the rights of the public as citizens of a nation, and how museums were treated as shrines to national culture. And then Simon Nell also spoke about the importance of national galleries, and he spoke on how the galleries should be looked at as sites where art is made to perform in acts of nation making. And then, of course, in Benedict and Anderson's Imagined Communities, he spoke about the connection between national imagination and the methods of surveys, mapping, and museums. So my inquiry is aligned with all these thoughts, and my question is: what happens when the nation is not present as such? What happens when the refugees imagine a nation in exile? For example, the case of the Tibetans in exile, they imagine a nation in exile. So how do museums reimagine the nation? How does a community without access to the nation imagine a nation, and how do they reimagine the space of a museum to represent themselves? So a quick introduction about the Tibetans in exile. They have been living in exile since 1959, since the Chinese invaded the country. So a group of Tibetans led by His Holiness the Dalai Lama entered India, and currently 3 generations of Tibetans in exile live in India right now. So we have the first generation who undertook the journey from Tibet to India. From there, they resettled to countries like Bhutan, Nepal, and India. And then the second generation who were born in exile and who have only heard of Tibet. And we have also a what scholars have referred to as a 1.5 generation. They were born in Tibet, but they were sent to exile by their parents. So all these 3 generations of Tibetans in exile are right now in India, in India and several parts of the world right now. So they are negotiating the spaces of statelessness, identity making, and laws. So where does Tibet Museum what is the role of the Tibet Museum in this negotiation of identity and placelessness and exile? So that is my line of inquiry. So about Tibet Museum. So the Tibet Museum is currently in Dharamshala, which is the de facto capital of Tibetans in exile. His Holiness the Dalai Lama's residence is there. The parliament is there. All the administrative offices of Tibetans in exile are situated in Dharamshala, which is in Himachal Pradesh, India. So Tibet Museum was established in 1998, which was then inaugurated by Dalai Lama in April 2000. So that museum was near the Dalai Lama's residence only. So the museum was placed near Dalai Lama's residence, where the Dalai Lama temple is also there. But then more objects were acquired by the museums. The space got enlarged. So they envisaged a new space for the museum, and the new museum was inaugurated near the parliament, which is the Kashab, which is also referred to as the Kashab, a 9,000 square foot big museum with around 40,000 photographs. Was inaugurated in 2022 by the Prime Minister, the Sikyong, and the objectives that they have referred to they have a website also, to document, preserve, research, exhibit, and educate Tibetans and non-Tibetans on all matters related to Tibet's history, culture, and present situation. That is the objective of Tibet Museum. Yeah, this is the logo, and it says linking past, present, and future. So the importance of Tibet Museum lies in the fact that it's part of a larger museum war that is happening. On the one hand, China, which has occupied Tibet, is on a museum spree. It is creating museums of their own, which they call the Tibet Museum, which gives voice to their version of history, which says Tibet was not an independent country and Tibet has always been part of China. But on the other hand, Tibetans in exile have their own version of meta-narrative, which says Tibet has always been an independent country and it was never a part of China. That is one point that we need to take care of when we are looking at the importance of Tibet Museum. Another context that we need to understand is the Tibetan objects are currently scattered across all the museums in the West. Because on the one hand, they have lost their land and there is no access to the objects that they have used, because it is occupied by China. And on the other hand, during the Cultural Revolution, they lost many objects. During the 1960s and 70s, the Cultural Revolution resulted in a loss of a lot of objects. And then in 1904, Young Husband mission to Tibet happened. And during that time also extensive looting took place. So all the artifacts and valuables are not accessible for the Tibetans in exile. So when they reimagine their existence, when they try to reimagine their identity, all they have access to are, one, the memories, and two, the objects that they carried, that the first generation of Tibetans carried when they were trying to escape from Tibet to India. So this museum is a museum by Tibetans and for Tibetans. And this is a protest against the museum representations of Tibet that currently exist in West, which is more of a Shangri-La version. Shangri-La refers to the exoticized representation of Tibet, a mythical representation, a utopian vision of Tibet that many Western, initial Western scholarship that came on Tibet referred to. Even now, Tibet is referred, even now, the idea of Tibet as a strange mythical land that cannot be touched. So that exists. And more importance is given to the religious aspect of it. The Buddhism and the mythical aspect of Tibet is given more importance. So this Tibet Museum tries to counter the Chinese version of history. Second, the Shangri-La version of Tibet that exists. So they are trying to create a narrative for themselves. So what the collections of the museum are from the people who have donated these objects that they took, the transitional objects that they took when they were trying to escape from Tibet to exile. So they have collected these objects and created a museum. They have photographs, they have these transitional objects, and another tool that they use is testimonials. They have testimonials of people who tried to escape, and then the memories that they were transferred from the first generation to the third generation and second generation. So here comes the idea of post memory. Post memory was something that was used in the context of the Holocaust, but here also it happens because the first generation is going to, they're really old. So even though there is an oral history, there are projects going on to preserve the memories of the first generation. For example, there is a Tibetan oral history project where they go to the old people, the first generation people, and take their interviews to preserve their memories. But Tibet Museum also plays a very important role. So this is the entrance, and they say, we are Tibetan and this is our story. The emphasis is on how it is their story and not the version as suggested by China or that of the West. So there are many sections. So my focus is only on the permanent exhibition that has been set up in the museum, and it is titled I Am Tibetan and This Is My Story. So it is divided into 10 sections. It talks about culture, who writes Tibet's history, who is the Dalai Lama, occupation, resistance. So they have divided it into 10 parts. And one thing that we have to notice is that they have tried to create a continuity from the past to the present. So they have a desire to project a sense of continuity, because while trying to forging the identity in exile, they have made sure they start from the past, then talk about the present, and then the future. Okay. And another point that we have to talk about when we talk about our culture or who writes Tibet's history, which Tibet are they longing for? So longing for homeland is something that is prevalent among Tibetans in exile, but they are longing for pre-exilic Tibet. They are longing for a Tibet that exists in a particular time and particular place. For example, when in the exhibit number 1, which talks about our culture, there are mentions of the dress, and then they talk about the bone religion, they talk about the map, and there are exhibits of the Potala Palace also. So the map that they are using to refer to Tibet is something that existed before Chinese occupation, because they talk about the 3 divisions of the original divisions of Tibet that existed before China invaded and rearranged the territories. So the longing is for a Tibet that they remember before they tried to escape from their own homeland, unfortunately, into exile. So this is one thing that we need to notice, that they are nostalgic about a pre-exilic Tibet. So how they choose to remember and depict Tibet as it was taken over by the Chinese. For example, they use the image of the Potala Palace very significantly throughout the exhibition. Potala Palace was the residence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, but currently under Chinese occupation, Chinese authorities have started a monumentalization, which is kind of an organized forgetting. They want the Tibetans within Tibet to forget that it had any association with Dalai Lama, and currently it is a museum. So it is a protest against the organized forgetting that is happening in their own homeland, and in this way it is a resistance also. Yes, and then they talk about, and then the narrative is, of course, that Tibet has always been independent, and the objects that they use in this narrative are one, memories, and the transitional objects that people have managed to take when they were trying to escape. And then another focus that we need to mention is how the Dalai Lama is portrayed. So the image of the Dalai Lama is always associated with religion or in other narratives. But here they have tried through the exhibits. There are many exhibits in place. There are questions. There is a mostly interactive. So the message or the idea of Dalai Lama that they are trying to portray is that of a human being, not as a religious figure. So that is also part of resisting the existing narratives that they have. These are some of the images of the exhibition. So we have the dressings. So all these three dressing styles are from three different parts of Tibet. So they are also countering the view that Tibet is a unitary or homogeneous entity. And then we have testimonials. For example, there are videos and testimonials of people who have gone through the escape and other. This is the map that they have displayed, and it's a very interactive space. The image of the Potala is there. And then another section is that of self-immolation. Tibetans, self-immolation is one tactic, is one method that many Tibetans have been forced to take to give a voice for themselves. So even while they are trying to portray self-immolation, it is done using testimonials. So no statistics is used, no numbers are used, unlike other museums. They have used testimonials because there is a video in which some visuals are also shared, and then the last statements of the protesters are also written down, and the visitors have to read the last statements of the protesters, and how the trauma is being, how the viewers perceive the act is different in this museum. So it has to be seen as a commemoration, and they're trying to construct it's a remembrance, it's a commemoration. Then the memory of escape, and many Tibetan refugees were forced to sell their possessions also, because when they reached India, they were poor, the financial conditions were not that great. So many Tibetans were forced to sell their possession. So in this museum, they have contacted the Tibetans, and they have been asked to donate their objects. They have contacted the Tibetan diaspora also. So the third generation, the second generation are sharing the objects that they have kept as a family possession. So this is how they have created the museum. So how they summon the memories of a homeland that they have left. So the very use of these transitional objects give them the narrative agency. And then one important, yes, these are the testimonials. Then how they act as sites of memory. This is one point that I'm looking at. Pierre Nora's idea of sites of memory, how memory crystallizes itself, how memory secretes itself. So how these transitional objects are used in creation of a memory. Then I have also used Natalia Bloch's concept of everyday patriotism to understand Tibet Museum. It talks about how even wearing a t-shirt that says I am Tibetan is part of everyday patriotism that they carry out in exile to make sure that they remain together, to maintain that solidarity and preserve culture in exile. So Tibet Museum, by conveying the message, by talking about the story of Tibetans to the viewers, is also a part of everyday patriotism that Natalia Bloch has pointed out. It can also be referred to as a post museum. There is a virtual museum also available. All of you can check out the virtual museum online. And then there are everyday events also happening there. There are discussions, and it's a very interactive museum also. Everyday events and screenings happen there. So in this sense, it can be also referred to as a post museum, where previously forgotten narratives and memories and how museums are becoming more multivocal in nature. So to conclude, I can say this Tibet Museum is a resistance, is an act of resistance, but they rely on absences. There are many boxes that are kept which do not have objects, because it's difficult to carry. They say ki, it is written there. It is difficult when you try to escape from your own homeland for fear of life. What things would you carry? So it's so difficult to attain those things. Also, there are boxes of absences also kept to remind the viewer that it's not easy being a Tibetan in exile. So it's a resistance against the myth of Shangri-La, and also a resistance against the Western idea of myth making that is related to Tibet. So when I already mentioned ki there is an interactive website also. So how Tibet Museum is being transformed into a distributive institution also, because Tibetan diaspora currently spread across the world, and they are migrating from India and countries of Asia to the West in search of better opportunities. So Tibetan diaspora is spread across the world right now. So how, by creating this virtual museum, they are extending the idea of imagined nationhood and collective identity, and creating object diasporas in nature. So these are the references. So thank you. This is a working paper. Yeah, I mean, it's part of a project, so I welcome comments and suggestions. And
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Lakshmi, for that excellent presentation. And your presentation reminded me of what Pamuk had talked about museum. He says that, museums are places where time is transformed into space. So I believe this museum, as I've understood from your presentation, is about creating an experience of Tibet,
yes,
and the experience is created through testimonials and sentimental objects, which together sort of create this nation, or brings alive this nation. And the nation, like you said, is absent, or as Anderson says, only and only imagined. So, through its imagined recreation of Tibet, if you could critically look at the politics of memory, memory making, where certain memories or certain experience are significant and therefore they are represented, while others are of less importance and therefore are not represented. Also, if you could talk about your experience of visiting this museum, I mean, critically, if you could evaluate your experience of visiting this museum as a visitor, especially in the context of how this nation, the absent nation, comes alive. If you could critically look at it. So, with that, I open the floor for questions. So if you could quickly respond or comment.
yeah. So one is the location of the museum. Um, the museum is located in Dharamshala, which is the de facto capital of Tibetans in exile. And they have located the museum near the Kashak, which is the legislature. And one thing that I noticed was there is a door, there is a window that opens to the parliament towards the end. So there is a communication happening between, the reality of exile in India. And then mostly they ask us to write down our feelings. So when we go through the testimonials or the reactions that the viewers have written down in the museum, we can say that not many are aware of the reality of Tibetans in exile, the political reality that they are going through. We know Tibetans through momos, we know Dharamshala as a tourist space, but not many are aware of the political situation of Tibetans, what forced them to come into exile. So I think the museum which is being visited by Tibetans and non-Tibetans alike. It's becoming a very popular destination for tourists who go to Dharamshala also. So I think that is a very key point that helps the viewers understand the political reality of Tibet and Tibetans in exile. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that, I invite Sudipta, who will guide you through the questions in the chat box. Sudipta, if you could raise the questions in the chat box.
So we don't have any questions. So I think we can move to the next presenter.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Lakshmi, I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. And before I move to the next presenter, I want to say that maybe, the Tibetan enclaves that are present in India could also be an interesting aspect to look at, that how, they are lived places where they practice the culture, and maybe a comparative study of vis-a-vis how the nation is imagined in these conclaves, and how the nation is imagined in the museum, and what is the relevance of this museum with respect to the enclaves. So I think that could be an interesting area to look at for your further studies. And thank you once again for your wonderful presentation. Also, before we move to the next speaker, I want to acknowledge the presence of Professor Michelle Borgaza, who is the keynote speaker for our next session. She's here with us for this paper presentation. So I welcome her, and I really thank you. I thank her for joining this session. So with that, I move to the third speaker of the
Me,
session.
Grace, just 1 minute. Professor Michaela Burzaga is not our next keynote speaker, but she will be speaking up in the days to come. But we are very glad to have a professor with us for the sessions. So
I'm so
keep
sorry.
joining the sessions. And
I'm really sorry. I just messed up the timings. I'm so sorry for that. But thank you, Professor Michelle Borgaza, for joining us. And with that, I move to the third speaker for this session, which is so our third speaker is Soumya Mani Tripathi. Her paper is titled as Moharram in Kashmir, Historical Trauma, Performance and Resistance. Soumya is a PhD scholar at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and currently works as a senior researcher at Museum of Art and Photography. Her broader research focuses on politics and performance and resistance movements through interdisciplinary study of art forms, and her PhD dissertation focuses on trauma, memory, and performance in Kashmir. So over to you, Soumya.
Hi. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, something is wrong. Can you see the full view or just
No. This is in that slide format. So
I don't know.
probably you can do a slideshow or an F5.
Is this okay? Does this work? I can't seem to work it out on.
Okay.
It works, Soumya.
It works.
So I'll just begin. The effect of historical trauma on communities and individuals and how they witness, resist, and heal from it has been the interest of many disciplines to explore. Performance studies, however, brings a new paradigm to understand and study trauma, memory, and recuperation by looking at the sites of body, affect, and culture as archives, which gives us an interdisciplinary insight into these tangible and intangible repositories of trauma and memory. I take the basic definition of trauma in this paper from Kathy Carruth's definition of trauma, which is defined as a response, sometimes delayed, to an overwhelming event or a set of events, which takes the form of repeated intrusive hallucinations, dreams, thoughts, and behaviors. Trauma is thus more than a wounded psyche. In culture, it is a representation of a wound that cries through uh, silences and pauses. It addresses us in attempts to tell us a reality or truth that is otherwise unavailable through reference to the event, but insists in precisely on the inescapability of its belated impact. The story of trauma, then, as a narrative of belated experience, is a story caught between affect, memory, and history, which is manifested through physical and sensorial enactments in the body. Performance attempts to constitute a mode of listening and reading and referring to the silence of the trauma and the mute repetition of its suffering, which witnessing so profoundly and imperatively demands. Culture at times organizes and other times experiments with the disruptive life of trauma. In this combination of culture production and collective traumatic memory, this helps us to peel back the skin and tissue of repression to uncover the utopian demand that memory stirs forth. In this respect, memorial culture may be considered as a corporeal movement in resistive memory thinking. This mode of thinking is both idealistic and realistic, not because it represents the essence of trauma in its entirety or the causes and effect of a singular event. Rather, utopian memory for utopian memory, thinking is ultimately how the social field conceptually, imaginatively, and materially grasps and labors over the socio-political contradictions that collective trauma exposes. Staging trauma driven performances in public sphere highlights the necessary role of creation of witnesses, and these performances disrupt what society claims to be master narratives. They reveal unspeakable things that do not possess us, but that we do not possess, but that possesses us like spectators. Poetry in forms of marcia and nohe, acts of weeping, methods of protesting, rhythm of self flagellation, embodiment of collective chest beating are elements of Muharram Azadari rituals that provide us with lacunae in an understanding of mourning resistance and its implication on long term political and social behavior of all parties at stake in the conflict zone. Prolonged study of memory in Kashmir has continually proven the fact that the Indian ruled Kashmir had the highest rates of post traumatic stress disorder in the world. Long-term traumatic experience of Kashmiris have ruptured the linear continuity of their understanding in history. Trauma thus is registered not on the body and psyche of the victim, it is also a debilitating kind of memory. And it is engraved on the body since the original experience is too overwhelming to be processed by mind. Trauma thus becomes a special form of body memory that can be triggered by the slightest association that connects the body to the bodily senses to the memories of the past traumatic event. With an unprecedented number of Kashmiri population showing symptoms of trauma, it can be argued that memories and affects of trauma have fundamentally altered all aspects of Kashmiri society, their politics, culture, and methods of resistance. Thus, these shared experiences have become a foundation for self identification, construction, and negotiation of memories and modes of articulation of resistance. Trauma, therefore, is not just a psychic condition of an individual mind, but translates into a collective body of a community on which politics is affected. These practices are often used for political mobilization through the means of ritual ceremonies and cultural protests. The increasing use of funerals as a site of resistance is an ongoing example of this in Kashmir. The For Kashmiri individuals who have suffered and continue to suffer the effects of trauma, intense and immediate investment in the mourning rituals of Azadari processions provides the mode through which the re-narration of traumatic memory can be translated from meaningless existence to collective catharsis. It dissolves the individual isolated pain into a collective bodily force of resistance. Participation and investment in such processes have been socially productive, emotionally healing, and give space to act out pain and release. The hyper-performative and corporeal nature of embodied Azadari performances of Kashmiri Nohe and Marsia and the use of religious ritual and symbols are commemorative strategies of memorial culture through which the evocation of Karbala metaphors of tortured images, dead bodies, graveyards, martyrdom slogans, and testimonies of loved ones provide a compelling bodily milieu into which experiences of trauma could be rendered meaningful in an effective embodied solidarity. The Muharram processions strategies also employ cultural modes that tap into body and emotions, connecting a ritualistic affective community made up of the sensorial character bodily memories generally can be characterized as a raw emotional nerve ending which lie in the body, vulnerable to ignition in contexts that tap into these extra linguistic realms of sensory memory. The corporeal and sensorial nature of embodied repertoires of Muharram ritual practices use various mnemonic devices to funnel pain into power by performing and reinterpreting a historical traumatic event of the past into a collective cathartic moment in the present. Now I come to Kashmir and the parts of Muharram rituals that are practiced there. Uh, this is the inside view of the shrine. Although district Badgam in Kashmir is the most Shia dominant place, population index wise, however, Zadibal, a place in Srinagar, remains the most important Shia worship site. It has two sites, one of the Sufi shrine of Mir Shamsuddin Araki, and the second is the Zadibal Imambara. This is also a political hub for dominance of Shia Muslims, and therefore these sites become prominent as sites of performance of Muharram in the valley. Brief introduction about the characters of tragedy of Karbala and what happens. So Ashura means the 10-day, although it lasts over to, it's an ongoing year-long thing for which preparations are in the background, poetry writing is in the background, rehearsals, banner making, all of these keep happening. But for the public and for the dominant Shia, the public performance of it, these are the 10 days. Ashura is the 10th day of it, where Hussein ibn Hussein was killed in the Battle of Karbala, and this is a commemorative event to ritualistic mourning, to mourn it, to celebrate the ideas of martyrdom, social justice, sacrifice, and other things are memorialized through this. If you pass through the public areas in Kashmir, this is how the month of Muharram is marked as an incoming. You will see flags, banners, slogans all over the site. And the design of this is also akin to the design of a political party or an incoming of a electoral process, because these also involve claiming spaces through banners, through these ideas, through slogans. So you have to understand that the very design of Muharram itself carries in itself a lot of protest meaning making. This is alam, or the sigils that are carried throughout the processions. This is called, the five finger thing is called as Panjatan, which are the five warriors, five most important people who led to Karbala being remembered today. This is Tabut or Tazia, which have Quran. The Tabut, the thing that you see inside has Quran, and this is the Zakir's cap, the poet who recites, who leads all of the recitation of Karbala poetry. He's offered this cap, the black cap with the feather on top. And the wooden thing is the emblematic representation of the site of Karbala. This is again Panjatan in different forms. These are all ritualistic objects that are carried in the processions in people's home and are considered sacred. This is a horse. This is Imam Hussein's horse, Zulzina, which is also called as Imam Gur, or the Imam's horse, who's taken out on a procession on 10th of Muharram, and he's paraded across as a victorious, and he's considered again sacred, that he carries the qualities of the warriorhood, bravery. So people try to touch him and take those things within themselves. This is Dog or Dod, which means an act of rhythmic chest beating on the performance of Nohe or Marcia, the elegiac poetries that are performed on the themes of Karbala. This is one of the most fascinating parts of the ritual, because during the self-flagellation and bloodletting and sharp injury to the body, people do not go to hospitals. I followed it firsthand during my fieldwork to notice that they really did not take treatment, or they did not go back. Their belief is that this is a sand dust from Karbala, which is called as khake shifa, or healing dust, which they believe, which they pour on their heads, their bodies, wherever they have self-flagellated, and they believe that it will cure them. and this is all they apply as a antidote to the pain. So this Muharram itself is tied with the idea of social justice, historical justice, bringing out memories of injustices. So it also becomes a playground to protest against all kinds of humanitarian injustices happening throughout the world, whether it is Israel or American invasion of Iran, Iraq. So all of these things are brought out in especially 8th Muharram Julus with banners, slogans on all kinds of political matters. Yes, so how at the sight of being choked out of breath by the state machinery, Kashmiri Shia bodies in Azadari rituals engage in acts of extensive breathing and maximum breathing by putting bodies to limits of movement and pain. These rituals emerge as a breathing space of assertion, expression, and resistance for the Shia Muslims of Kashmir. So for me, trauma is a pulmonary disorder as well. It's a control in breathing. It's an act of seizure of breath, of history, of selfhood, of the breath itself. Literally, it's an assault on senses, which creates pathologies in the body. It is exhibited as arrhythmic acts of breathing. So this becomes for them a site of breathing, a site of deep breathing, a site of maximum breathing, a site of cathartic release. They enact the protest in a dialectical space with the armed police forces, impersonate the commanders of Karbala to defend the ideals of Hussainiyat and Kashmiriyat all in one, and imitate the sacrifices made in Karbala in honor of God and family and the entire humanity. When these armed men of the state come towards come towards these mourners with batons and guns in hands, the mourners start self flagellating with sharper weapons than them. This sacrificial blood falls on policemen's faces, and an invisible bubble of pain and madness surrounds these bodies. These are bodies that have transcended then the code of conduct, the limits of everyday social behavior, and there can be no expectation or prediction of their behavior now. This is what I call as the bodies in trance state that uh, takes a moment in various forms in during the month of Muharram. And so this becomes a site where transformation is possible, where something where you would imagine if somebody is hurting you, you would try to protect yourself or defend yourself, and instead you show them the grotesqueness of their own violence by bloodletting and saying that you already have done this much to me. Can you see it? Can you take this yourself? Like, this is the harm that I can conduct on myself, and show you the blood that you caused to me. So can you do more to me than this? In that moment, something very different, very resilient. I don't. There's no moral righteousness to it, but something very different and trance-like state is produced for me, which causes some kind of moral transformation within the eyes of the oppressor. The speed and rhythm with which they beat themselves up, whether with hand or weapons, makes that a space and a site of horror and madness that affects surrounding bodies in an intense, alleviated response. Several policemen were injured trying to get around these men, arrest them, or hurt them because they created a time whirlpool around their passion plate that brought the truth of Karbala alive in Kashmir. Uh, the most intimate part of the Karbala ritual practice is called as Majlis. Majlis is a practice where people gather in imambadas, mosques, and houses for mourning, and the recitation of Noha, Marsiya, Maula ki Dawat, and Zikr is conducted during the months of. So, this is a very sacred practice in which only each locality, the people of each, even believers of each locality, are allowed. Nobody, even Shia Muslims from outside of community, are allowed, because it becomes a very vulnerable space where you rehearse mourning, basically, where you rehearse weeping and you get vulnerable. So that intimacy is created by the familiarity of bodies that know each other, see each other everywhere. From 7th, this is performed till 7th Muharram. From 7th Muharram onwards, these go from sacred side to the street sides, which means they go from the private sphere to the public, and they are performed in as a julus, as a procession, where they conduct Dod, Zanzir Jani, which is self-flagellation with sharp metallic objects, and a variety of public assimilations records and participates in this julus. However, Majlis remains the most intimate space of all mourning activities. Uh, a little bit about Nohe. Nohe, when interpreted in the light of Shia views, is an elegy about the tragedy of Hussein ibn Ali in the Battle of Karbala. Marcia and Noha have the historical, literary, and social milieu of pre Islamic, Arabic, and Persian cultures. The performative, rhythmic, musical composition of Marcia poetry are called as Noha and Soz, which means lamentation. It is a lyrical poetry based on themes of Karbala, recited and performed in a chorus by mourners on the simultaneous beating of the chest, which is called as Dod. Marcia can be mostly seen as a literary form, whereas Noha is more of a performative form. Marcia can be recited individually. Noha is always mostly recited in chorus. These are key differences, apart from they both being part of elegiac poetry. Marcia is derived from an Arabic word marthia, meaning great tragedy or lamentation for a departed soul. It is an elegiac poetry written mainly for commemorating the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, and his Ahlul Bayt means family members in Karbala. Its advent in Kashmir is traced to 14th century AD, which itself is the period of introduction of Islam in Kashmir. Arabic and Persian poetry was its form initially, which can be traced to the works of many in Kashmir, from Bulbul Shah to Mir Sayyid Ali Hamdani, who was the great Sufi pioneer saint in Kashmir Valley. Certain efforts were made to adapt this art into vernaculars. Origins of Kashmiri Marcia has its root in congregation and recital performances of Kashmiri elegy, which was known as Van.
Soumya,
And
your time is up,
yes,
so can you please quickly?
okay. So this is the last part. I won't go beyond this. And trigger warning. So these are banned by the Khamnahi, by the religious leaders of Shia Muslims, which is the acts of Zanjir Jani or acts of walking on fire or self-flagellating. They're highly debated among the Shia community themselves, but they're nevertheless conducted. And this is it. Apart from it, other endeavors that are done in Muharram is a blood bank is set up where people can donate blood instead of doing this. Other kinds of food camps and water camps and COVID vaccination camps were set up. There's a wall of kindness which feeds and puts out cloth in the harsh winter of Kashmir for the people who survive on streets. So I would like to end here. Thank you.
Thank you, Soumya, for that wonderful presentation. And so it's very interesting how you conducted your field work in Kashmir, I suppose, and how you were able to bring these photographs for us. I have a quick question. Lamentations are an important oral literary tradition of this community, especially during this Muharram, which is observed for a month-long period, and it's not a one-day thing. So, how do you see, especially in the context of Kashmir, how do you see the aesthetic and the political relevance of lamentations in this Muharram procession, and what is the role of lamentation in Muharram? Uh, what does it signify? How does it contribute in the memory making? How does it I mean, how does it politically sort of consolidate the community or mobilize the community? Also, if you could comment upon the performative aspect of tazia as well as the cultural and political significance of tazia, it would be interesting.
Okay, so that will take quite a lot of time because my
Yeah,
entire
brief,
is in that. But
very quick
I'll try to
responses.
summarize it. So, mourning for me, in very simple terms, is related to radical remembrance. Mourning is related to expression of a community where the expression itself is censored. Mourning is related to creating a space for justice and witnessing, community witnessing. which is again, all of these become political in acts of how bodies were killed, how politics were played on live and dead bodies, how they are disappeared, how they are forced not to remember or to forget. And so this space becomes for me an alternate a counterculture of sorts of history writing itself, where communities who remember are in direct opposition of the state's master narrative, which is saying everything is all right, it's all terrorism, it's all militancy, and they are here producing, although when they're mourning Karbala through the metaphors of Karbala, they're actually bringing alive the present Kashmir. When they're mourning the death of people in Karbala, they're actually mourning they're getting, this is the only space in Kashmir where men can cry publicly. So this becomes a very cathartic space for release, and catharsis is one of the restorative devices through which bodies can survive in continued conflict zones. Uh, Politics of this is continuously connected to the performance of live bodies, acts of memories, and how collectives are coming together for a belief, basically. So what does Karbala represent? It represents a historical injustice, and Kashmir is Karbala. So again, that automatically comes into being. The ideas of Yaziniat and Hussainiyat, the evil and goodness that is inherently present in the ritual form, is also the fight of the state and the citizen currently. That something is trying to oppress you, and you have to stand your ground for the goodness, for the moral righteousness. So again, that plays into them becoming continued body of resistances. And then strangely, since these processions are attacked because these bodies are completely out of control, so state cannot control the citizen subjects, and so heavy shellings and arrest and all of these things happen, and this becomes a site for Shia Sunni mobilization, where they become brothers suddenly on the grounds of azadi. So the idea of freedom from the Karbala is taken and asserted in the present part of Kashmir. So the very design, everything, the visual aspect, the sonic aspect, the performative aspect, the assertion of bodies, how, what the meaning making of the Nohe and Marcia. I had a category actually that I wanted to present, but I missed out, is the category of lament. Uh, so lament becomes a marker of conflict zones, whether it is Holocaust or Palestinian lullaby or Kurdish lullaby, anywhere you see, this becomes a category that carries the essence of conflict zones, which is a lullaby and a lamentation, and which has a healing in music therapy. It is seen as one of the most important and intense methods of palliative care, which provides healing. So lament is the core nature of the melodic parts of Nohe and Marcia singing. Um, Apart from it, mourning as an act itself is seen because too much mourning, too much radical remembrance produces subjects that will question the state, that will question the norm, the code of behaviors. So it has a certain rebellion and infusion and emotional part in it that pushes the limits of oneself, that pushes the body to go beyond boundaries, and that is very threatening for anybody that is trying to control these bodies. So there's a so mourning itself is an act of resistance, I would say.
Very interesting, and I'm sure it's a very thought-provoking paper. So I would pass it on to Sudipta. Sudipta, if there are any questions in the chat box.
I will directly ask a question. Sana?
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Soumya. So nice, such a lovely presentation. And it's so lovely to know that this paper comes from a very rigorous and meticulous field work. I was just interested in the gender dynamics that probably, exists in these processions, and how, if at all, it created trouble for you as a female, non-Kashmiri, I'm assuming, researcher.
Yeah, so it's very problematic actually. I cannot give one way answer to it, but I'll try to bring as many perspectives on it as possible. Uh, so one of the questions that I had was, why are women not allowed to do Zanjeer Jani? Uh, And the possible answers that I got from everyone, all the mourners involved, was they menstruate, so they already naturally let out blood. So we consider that itself as a sacrifice, natural sacrifice that they do. B, the Islamic morality would not allow a woman's bare bodies to be exhibited the way men's bodies are exhibited in these rituals, and blood and all of that part. And the third, because children and their care is majorly a task that is assigned to motherhood and women and domestic labor to the female bodies, and thus it would not be wise to put them in harm's way, uh, because children are dependent on them. These were the three views I got. Although all the places where, even in the intimate circles, a silhouette is drawn, even the Imambara is constructed in a way where there are a clear gender divide. Men will be performing in the center and women will be sitting in the zanana quarters, and there's a black silhouette that is drawn, silhouette cloth is drawn between the two to keep the barriers. And throughout it I see that. But I also see different ways, like for example in the story, Zainab is the one, in the story of Karbala, Lady Zainab is the one who is actually credited with conducting khutbas and bringing out this story in public and starting the first mourning. And she's seen as the political leader of them, spiritual leader of them. So all the stories regarding the female figures in Karbala, I also see men trying to access their feminine sides by embodying their voices through Nohe and Marcia. So in poetry, this helps. In Noha and Marcia performance, this helps the men. But in the actual physical spaces, women have least mobility. In Eighth Muharram protest, where it is guaranteed that there will be clashes with the police forces, with the armed forces, no women come out. It's only men that come out. Only journalists or interns that are interested in covering those protests come out are females. Maximum percentage of public performance of it is taken up by men. So it can't be denied that patriarchy doesn't exist in this community, or the great gender divide of female labor and male labor. Ideas of moralities, of honor, of body, all of this doesn't exist. It does exist in ritual performance also, it exists. But I'm also interested in seeing how this performance, kind of whether it's called madness or faith or whatever, in the garb of this, is any kind of freedom of expression or cathartic release offered to these gendered bodies or not. So for females, it is the majlis is conducted in two parts. One is everyone's majlis, male and female, where the curtains will be drawn, and there are only female majlises. And for me, this became a very important site to study and understand how feminine voice of resistances were articulated. They were not necessarily voices of glorification of war, like guerrilla bodies which are saying, see, like I'm flagellating myself. But it became more like voices of intellectual and nurturing, voices that were for healing, voices that were for mourning for children and the killing of soft things in life. So those spaces, for me, how they conducted themselves, what did female bodies do in these 10 days, that became an important part for me to understand the quintessential feminine voice of resistance, and how it brings more healing. What is its role? So yeah, when I think publish, you can read more in detail about it. I hope that answers something.
Yeah, and thank you, Soumya. It answer. I think you answered very well, and it was a lovely presentation. So with that, we come to an end of this session. I invite Soumya and Sana to take over.
So we begin with Professor Steph Krabs, who has already joined us. Welcome, sir. We'll directly begin just after like a second's break, maybe a couple of minutes for the technical setup.
I think in the meantime, we can thank all the paper presenters. all three paper presentations were wonderful. They were thought-provoking, and we all look forward to their subsequent publications. And thank you.
And I would also like to thank Grace for doing such a wonderful job chairing this session. And of course, to all the presenters, it was very enriching. We do have some questions.